But there's the added activity of religion, which is something that human beings do, which animals don't do. You don't see animals praying. Have you ever seen an animal pray or an animal meditating or performing Ashtanga yoga? The animals don't have any clue about doing these things. If there's found to be an animal that's highly elevated in spiritual consciousness, it's only because it was a human being in its past life and made some mistake, and therefore it has its remembrance from the previous life. Otherwise, the animals don't have any spontaneous interest in spiritual cultivation. So the distinguishing feature of the human life from the animal life is this principle of religion. Chandrasekhar Maharaj ki jai. This spiritual realization can be attained by this practice of tapasya. So Prabhupada continues in this purport, reading another related purport. Today's purport 296. When Brahma was perplexed about how to construct the material manifestations in the universe, he went down within the water to find the means and source of his lotus seat. He heard the word tapa vibrated twice. Taking the path of tapa is the second birth of the desiring disciple. The word upashrinot is very significant. It's similar to upanayana, or bringing the disciple near the spiritual master for the path of tapa. So Brahmaji was thus initiated by Lord Krishna, and this fact is corroborated by Brahmaji himself in the book Brahma Samhita. In the Brahma Samhita, Lord Brahma has sung in every verse, Govindam Adi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Thus, Brahma was initiated by the Krishna mantra, by Lord Krishna himself. And thus he became a Vaishnava or devotee of the Lord before he was able to construct the huge universe. Stated that in Brahma Samhita that Lord Brahma was initiated into the 18-letter Krishna mantra, which is generally accepted by all devotees of Lord Krishna. So that's described in the Gita, as Brahma Samhita 524. Then the goddess of learning Saraswati, the divine consort of the Supreme Lord, said thus to Brahma, who saw nothing but gloom in all directions, O Brahma, this mantra, Klim Krishnaya Govindaya Gopijana Balabhaya Svaha, will surely fulfill your heart's desire. O Brahma, do thou practice spiritual association by means of this mantra, and all your desires will be fulfilled. That's from the Brahma Samhita, and that's those two verses where he's actually, those two verses, 24 and 25. Of course, chapter 5, which is the only chapter we have, 24 and 25. Yeah. So then back to the purport I was reading, which was 296. We follow the same principle because we belong to the Brahma Sampradaya, directly in the cyclic chain from Brahma to Narada, Narada to Vyasa, Vyasa to Madhva Muni, from Madhva Muni to Madhavendra Puri, from Madhavendra Puri to Ishvara Puri, from Ishvara Puri to Lord Chaitanya, and gradually to His Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, our Divine Master. One who is thus initiated in the disciplic succession is able to achieve the same result or power of creation. Chanting of this holy mantra is the only shelter of the desireless, pure devotee of the Lord. Simply by such penance, or such tapasya or penance, the devotee of the Lord achieves all perfections like Lord Brahma. So the idea is that we perform penance by chanting the mantra that we heard in the disciplic succession. So that's the point that Prabhupada's making here. We chant Krishna mantra, which we have received through the disciplic succession. Now, the most I guess, amazing verse about penance. There's a verse in which penance is mentioned 4 times. And it's a verse that's spoken by Lord Krishna himself. It's 2:924. Srijami tapasai vedam grasami tapasa puna bibarmi tapasa vishvam viryam me duskaram tapa. So this is Lord Krishna speaking to Lord Brahma. I create this cosmos by such penance. I maintain it by the same energy, and I withdraw it all by the same energy. Therefore, the potency is in penance only. So Prabhupada has a whole purport where he enthusiastically advocates penance. He says, in executing penance, one must be determined to return home back to Godhead and must decide to undergo all types of tribulations for that end. So here is indicating what the goal of our penance is. We're performing penance because we want to go back to Godhead. Even for material prosperity and name and fame, one has to undergo severe types of penances. Otherwise, no one can become an important figure in this material world. Like if you want to be an athlete who wins the Olympics, you have to train like every single day. Or if you want to be a musician, you have to practice every day. Yeah. So why then should there not be severe types of penance for the perfection of devotional service? And then there's this sentence which is famous: an easygoing life and attainment of perfection and transcendental realization cannot go together. The Lord is more clever than any living entity, therefore he wants to see how painstakingly the devotee is in devotional service. The orders received from the Lord, either directly or through the bona fide spiritual master, and to execute that order, however painstaking, is the superior type of penance. So here he's defining what the penance is. Again, that it's to do whatever your guru tells you to, no matter how inconvenient or difficult it is. One who follows that principle rigidly is sure to achieve success in attaining the Lord's mercy. Now there's a whole section on penance in the Bhagavad Gita, because in chapter 17, Krishna talks about penance, charity, and austerity in the 3 modes of material nature. So, and actually the section on penance is longer than the sections on the other 2, because he describes penance in the mode of goodness in 4 verses, whereas generally he just uses 1 verse for each activity and each mode. So he says that the tapa, the austerity of the body, consists in worshiping the Supreme Lord, the brahmanas, the spiritual master, and superiors like the father and mother, and in cleanliness, simplicity, celibacy, and non-violence. Austerity of speech consists in speaking words that are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, and not agitating to others, and also in regularly reciting the Vedic literature. And satisfaction, simplicity, gravity, self-control, and purification of one's existence are austerities of the mind. So these are all austerities that are relevant to us because we're devotees of Krishna, and Krishna is advising that we perform them. And of course, they're part of the sadhana bhakti that Srila Prabhupada has given us. Certainly worship of the Supreme Lord, worship of the spiritual master, celibacy, non-violence, cleanliness, it's all there. And also the austerity of speech and regularly reciting the Vedic literature. We have our Srimad Bhagavatam class. Morning, many places we have a evening class. In London, they have 3 classes. They have a morning class, a noon class, and an evening class. So they have a lunch program where they invite people to come to the noon arati, have the Mahaprasadam, and hear a lecture on the philosophy. So regular reciting Vedic literature is the austerity, an austerity of speech. So then, summarizing these, Krishna says that this threefold austerity performed with transcendental faith by men not expecting material benefits, but engaged only for the sake of the Supreme, is called austerity and goodness. Then he talks about the 2 unrecommended types of austerities that demoniac people perform. Penance performed out of pride and for the sake of gaining respect, honor, and worship is said to be in the mode of passion. It is neither stable nor permanent. Penance performed out of foolishness with self-torture or to destroy or injure others is said to be in the mode of ignorance. So in the Krishna book, there's a nice example of that kind of penance. So there's this demon named Vrikasura who cuts off pieces of his flesh and puts them in a fire to worship Lord Shiva. And he's very impatient because Lord Shiva hasn't come and he's already cut off a lot of his flesh. So he decides he's going to cut off his head. And then Lord Shiva, who's omniscient, decides that he really should do something to help the guy. So he shows up and offers him any benediction. So that's a penance performed out of foolishness with self-torture. And then, so what does he ask for? He asks for the ability that if he touches someone's head, that it will split open and the person will die. So that's to destroy or injure others. So he has all features of penance in the mode of ignorance. Yeah. And then on top of that, he decides to try it out on Lord Shiva. So that's a perfect example of penance in the mode of ignorance. So we know Hiranyakashipu, we just had the Lord Nrsimha's appearance. He performed so much penance with the idea of taking over the whole universe and becoming immortal. That's also not recommended. The purpose of the penance is to purify our consciousness, to reawaken our dormant love for God. There's a nice verse. Nityasiddha Krishna Prema Sadhikabu Nai, Shavanadi Shuddha Chitte Karye Udai. Nityasiddha Krishna Prema, love of God is eternally established in the heart. Sadhikabu Naya, it's not something to be gained from an outside source. Shravanadi, when one begins it with performing devotional service, beginning with hearing, Shuddha Chitte, one's consciousness becomes purified. Karya Udaya, that love which is already there becomes manifest. So now tapasya is also promoted in the Bhagavad Gita in a nice verse 18.5, where Krishna explains that activities of sacrifice, charity, and penance are not to be given up. They must be performed. Indeed, sacrifice, charity, and penance purify even the great souls. So even if you think you're a great soul and you don't need to perform penance, Krishna recommends you perform it anyway, because you can still become more purified. So those are some additional verses supporting the necessity of performing penance. Basically, we are eternal spiritual souls, and we are unfortunately encased in a temporary material body, which is limiting our enjoyment of life. And we have this material body because of our past activities. And therefore, we have to change our activities if we want to if we want to not have a temporary material body. If we just act as we've been acting, we'll just attain another material body because we're acting in the same consciousness that produced this body. Basically, Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita that we're conditioned by the three modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And as long as we act according to our imagination, we'll continue to act out of goodness, passion, and ignorance, because that's all we can think of, actually. And we're completely controlled. So if we're to transcend the effect of the material nature, we have to act according to a higher direction. And that higher direction is Krishna's instructions, which are transcendental. And the instructions of the liberated souls are also transcendental. And if we instead we abandon the path of acting according to our imagination and take up the path of acting according to Krishna's directions, then our consciousness becomes purified from the association with the material energy. So therefore we have to perform the penance, and that's received through the disciplic succession. In this age, it's recommended that one perform penance by chanting the holy name of the Lord. There's many, many references to the chanting of the holy name. There's the Leela where Lord Chaitanya was chanting and dancing in ecstasy, and the Mayavadi Swamis, they didn't really much appreciate that because they thought he should study Vedanta as a proper Swami instead of singing and dancing in the company of fanatics. So Lord Chaitanya explained that his guru said that he was foolish and unfit to study Vedanta, and that it was better for him to chant the holy name. And then in that connection, Lord Chaitanya offered one verse supporting the idea of chanting the holy name. Harinam, Harinam, Harinama Vikevalam, Kalo Nashteva, 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 Gatyanita. So that's a very powerful verse because it says, if one's interested in self-realization in this age of Kali, he must chant the holy name. He must chant the holy name. He must chant the holy name. There's no other way. There's no other way. There's no other way. So that makes it very clear. But if it's not clear enough, there's many, many other verses. Kaler dosha nidhe rajanasi heko mahan gunan kirtanadeva krishnasya mukta sangha param vajat. This age of Kali is an ocean of faults, O king, but it has one good quality. Simply by chanting the holy name of Krishna, one can attain the supreme liberation. And then, of course, the one verse, the main verse that describes the Yuga avatar for this age, Krishna Varnam Trisha Krishna Sango Pangastra Parshna Yagnai Sankirtana Praya Yajati Sumedasa, says that Lord Chaitanya is worshipped primarily by the Sankirtan of the holy name. The word prayai means chiefly, according to Srila Prabhupada. So we may worship Gaura-Nitāya deities, we may read Chaitanya Charitamrita, but the main thing we do to worship Lord Chaitanya is engage in the Sankirtan, the congregational chanting of the holy name. Actually, there's a couple places where the idea of what is the best process of devotional service comes up. After the great Mayavadi scholar, teacher of Swamis, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, was converted to Vaishnavism by Lord Chaitanya. He asked Lord Chaitanya, what is the best process of devotional service? And Lord Chaitanya said, Nam Sankirtan. And then when he's talking to Sanatana Goswami, that's Madhya 6:241. And then when he's talking to Sanatana Goswami in Antya 470 and 471, he said, the 9 processes of devotional service are the best because they can develop one's love of Krishna. But of all these, the best is Nam Sankirtan. So that's our practice. We chant on our beads in the morning, and we chant in kirtan, morning, noon, and evening. There's also a morning kirtan, and then there's Harinam Sankirtan, and then there's the evening kirtan. So this tapasya of chanting the holy name, it purifies our consciousness. It's interesting. There's that verse, the first verse of the Shikshashtaka, Cheto Darpana Marjanam is referred to. And Prabhupada quotes Cheto Darpana 553 times if you do the search. Because that was something that was a theme in his preaching, was that our problem is our consciousness is contaminated and it needs to be purified, and that's done by the chanting of the holy name. So that's our penance. We perform this chanting of the holy name and our consciousness becomes purified. And Srila Prabhupada had the conviction that if we chant every day 16 rounds, trying to give up the offenses, that within one life, our consciousness will become completely purified of material contamination, and we will be able to go to the spiritual world. So, and he was so enthusiastic about this. In his late 60s, he got on a boat for 38 days to bring this chanting to the West, because he understood that the people in the West are completely absorbed in the lower modes of material nature, especially the mode of ignorance. These activities that elicit sex, meat eating, intoxication, and gambling, they're all perfect examples of action in the mode of ignorance. And therefore, everyone's producing, they're acting in such a way they're going to get a body in the mode of ignorance in the next life. It's described, there's this verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Urdvam gacchati sattvasta, those who are in the mode of goodness, they go up. Manyatishtami rajasa, those in the mode of passion, they stay in the middle in human society. And Jaganya guna vritti sta dog gachanti tamasa, those in the abominable mode of ignorance, they go down to lower species. So Prabhupada saw everybody in the West preparing themselves to enter a lower species. And as a compassionate Vaishnava, he decided he would try to do something about it. So he performed the great austerity. I've taken trains for 38 hours, but I've never taken a boat for 38 days. I imagine it's even more austere. So, but he had the conviction that this holy name is so powerful that it can completely transform these people's consciousness, although it's situated solidly in the lowest mode of nature. So we should also have faith in the power of the holy name, like Srila Prabhupada did, and enthusiastically perform the penance in our own life. Chanting, trying to hear the mantra, and trying to focus on the mantra. Because what purifies the mind is the mind's absorption in Krishna. All the 9 items of devotional service are meant to be performed with the mind fixed on Krishna. It's described that the Maharaj Ambarish, Svayamana Krishna Paradar Vindayo, he engaged all his senses in devotional service, but he began with the mind. Because unless your mind is engaged in devotional service, you won't be able to engage your senses in devotional service. So it all begins with the mind, and if we think about Krishna as we're performing the acts of devotional service, it's even more powerful than just doing the acts. The acts themselves are powerful because they're divine acts, but if our mind is actually thinking about Krishna when we're performing them, then we get the full benefit. So this penance is absolutely a necessity for us to purify our consciousness. Otherwise, we'll remain contaminated by the 3 modes of material nature. And in the Kali Yuga, that's not very good, because the most popular mode of material nature is the mode of ignorance, which leads one downward. So those are some thoughts on penance. Does anybody have any thoughts on penance or realizations about penance from their practice or hearing lectures? Would you like to say any words about penance?
It's Canto Nayam Deho.
Oh, that, yeah, I meant to quote that one. Yeah. Shudyat Yushmad Brahma Sokyam Tvanantam.
That those who have taken the human form of life should not work hard for sense gratification, which is available even to dogs and hogs that eat stool. Rather, one should perform tapo dibyam, or divine penance, which gives knowledge and everlasting happiness, which is beyond, material desire.
Yeah, that's a very important point.
What is that, 558 or something?
551, actually. It's right off the bat. Yeah, I think 558 is the one about the sex desire being the cause of bondage. Then 554 is Nunam Pramata Kurte Vikarma Hadindriya Pritya Apranoti Sadhamane Yatamano Yamasana Pikleshada Ashadeha. How one should not engage in a sense gratification, because they'll end up with another temporary body which is full of misery. So that's a big theme, that the human form is simply meant for this tapasya, to purify our existence. Then he says also that Prahlad Maharaj starts off that Komaram Acharya Pragyo Dharma Bhagavatamiya, that one should start this from the tender age of childhood, when one's a boy of 5, Kumara. You had something to say?
Thank you for the talk. Sometimes we have seen, when we meet outside people, when they're interested in taking up to Krishna consciousness, they face a very great difficulty in moving from their material orbit. Just like the planets are moving their orbit, to shake it off from the orbit is very tough, very difficult. So similarly, I've seen even the students, when they take it up, they have been put in certain type of situation where they have certain tendencies, certain samskaras. So to push them from their material orbit and to bring them to Krishna conscious platform, it becomes very difficult. So so when we talk about chanting Hare Krishna, taking up to chanting certain number of rounds, getting up early in the morning, some students feel it very big difficulty. So now how do we help them develop the determination to perform penance?
Well, if we have faith in the goal, then it helps us have the enthusiasm to perform the activities that are required to attain the goal. So it's important to understand that everyone's an illusion, thinking that there's some kind of material happiness that's actually going to satisfy their soul. So if they can be convinced, actually, there's absolutely nothing in the material world that will ever actually make them happy. But this awakening of devotional service can make one happy. Then they might be motivated to perform it. Basically, people who it's easier for people who burned out on sense gratification to be enthusiastic about devotional service, and sometimes completely necessary. So basically, people are engaged in chewing that which is already chewed. So basically, they have to come to the realization that your life isn't going to get better by acting according to their material, tendencies. That it's a limited trip. All material pleasure is temporary, and all material pleasure is mixed with distress. And the result of devotional service is always eternal happiness. And it's now Krishna makes the point that it's even happy in the beginning. He says, Sukham kartam aviyam, So we can focus on the happy aspects of devotional service, the singing and the dancing and the prasadam, and try to get them to cultivate an attachment to the easier and more joyful aspects of the devotional service. And then when they have a solid attachment to that, then they will be willing to give up things to progress in that way. Because one of the problems is people are deeply addicted to material things. But if they can see intellectually that it's actually a dead end street, and of course, a main strategy is that we try to engage their material talent in Krishna's service, so they can do something they like to do for Krishna, and then that way they feel happy because they're doing something they like to do. Their materially conditioned mind feels satisfied because they're doing something they like to do, and at the same time they're becoming purified because they're linked to Krishna. So that's a key thing. So with each of the people, try to find out in detail what sorts of things they like to do, and then try to engage them in things like that. And sometimes they're very talented. They know computer graphics, and they can make flyers for our events, and then they can feel happy doing that. And then there was one guy who would come to the programs. We have a preaching center in Gainesville at the University Krishna House, and one person would come to the programs. He was an Indian guy, but he was getting more interested in spiritual things, and he came to the realization that he had to make new friends, because all his friends like to stay up late and party and stuff, but he wanted to get up early and chant, So he had to make friends with people who went to bed early. so would be supporting his spiritual inclinations. So that's the ultimately association is very, very powerful, and ultimately people will have to make friends with people who have a spiritually minded outlook, So, and that's one of the reasons why these places like Krishna House are sort of successful, because you have a group of people all the same age who are all getting into Krishna consciousness at the same time. So you have friends who are doing the same thing, and it's very supportive. You can share your, practice and realizations and things like that, because they have other people the same age from the same background who are practicing the same thing at the same time. So trying to think, when I joined the temple, I was traveling with some friends, and we are going to meet one of our friends who graduated the previous year on the West Coast. And so Niranjana Swami said to me, why don't you use the time you've taken off from school to live in the temple and see how much spiritual advancement you can make? If you go out to the West Coast, you'll do the same old hackneyed materialistic activities that you've been doing here. And I sort of, somehow or other, I had the understanding that wherever you go, your consciousness goes with you, or your karma goes with you, that you are actually going to come to a better place, So I ended up staying in the temple. But he told me like 20 years later that I was the hardest person that he ever convinced to stay, and he had to pray to Krishna, right? And I was trying to figure that out, because all I remembered is he made that logical argument, and it made sense, and I went for it. But because my friends, they weren't into it, and they wanted to continue traveling, I was like caught between this nice offer that the Swami was making and my friends who were continuing on their journey, and we're going to see my favorite friend from the previous year. So I was caught between two things, and I didn't realize that whole trauma until he said that like 20 years later. You're the hardest person that I ever convinced that I had to pray to Krishna. So that's something that can actually make a difference. I actually had this amazing, I lived in San Diego like 30 years ago. And one time I just came into the temple room and I was just about to bow down. And before I could bow down, Kavichandra Swami said to me, we have to desire that people become Krishna conscious. So many people became Krishna conscious simply because Srila Prabhupada desired. Yeah. And it was like such a striking thing, you know, out of the blue, you know. He said that. I lived there between 88 and 94, which was like 32 to, 26 years ago, but it made an impression in my mind. You know? So we can actually pray. Like there was this girl on the train yesterday on the way back from the Harinam on the bridge, you know, and she was immediately attracted to the kirtan, and somebody gave her the flyer for the Rath Yatra, and then I gave her the Enchanting, and Tulsi gave her a book, and I gave her the card to Govinda's, and you could see her boyfriend wasn't into it very much at all, you know. He wanted us to, at one point he told us to be quiet so that people could get on and off, or whatever. But she was, so I actually prayed to Krishna, please help this girl somehow or other become your devotee, you know, because she seems to have some attraction. So we can actually pray, and in the case of me, it made a difference that Ranjana Swami prayed that I stay in the temple. So if you're very pure in heart, like he is, make a difference. But I know Chandrasekhar Maharaj has some realizations about this point. Would you like to add to what I said?
I think that Arjunananda has asked the $64 million question, which is actually the question we should be all meditating on.
Right.
You know, that I think it's a combination of ingredients. You know, the first thing we should know is, you know, this verse in Bhagavad Gita, Boga Shvarya Prasaktanam Tapa Taya Pahitya Chetasam Vyabhasayatmakabhi Samadhanavadiyate, that as long as one is attached to sense enjoyment, the resolute determination for Krishna consciousness does not take place. So there are those people who will never warm up, and we should just kind of forget about them. Right. You know, there are lots of causes, at least at the present moment. They're the green mangoes, you know? Yeah, prasadam or whatever, you know. But people who step forward, we're going to have to realize that we have to build bridges for them and give them, you know, the right crutches and the right medical treatment and all that kind of thing, because I'm reminded of that verse, Yena Tena Prakarena Mana Krishna Nivesha, yet somehow or other just become Krishna conscious. And I think for different people, it's going to take different things. Yeah. You know, so all those things we have to use at our disposal, you know, making friends with people, joking with people, engaging them in some kind of, abilities that they already have. Say they have some musical talent or artistic talent, or they have some proclivity for theater or whatever it is, you know. If we can dovetail their interest in Krishna consciousness, because the whole idea is just getting a person to hang around enough to get a lethal dose of Krishna consciousness. Once they've got a lethal dose, it's all over at that point. You know, they're on the way, and nothing can change it. Even if they go away, you know, Krishna will drag them back at some point. But I think also what you said too is a very key thing, is the idea of praying to Krishna for the benefit of it. I think often we don't think about that. But, you know, Krishna has pledged to give us free will. So in other words, if we don't want Krishna, Krishna's not going to force himself. Right. Now, out there in the material world, there are all kinds of people who don't want Krishna. So what will happen to them? There's only one thing that can happen to them. They'll gradually go further and further down that sinkhole that goes down into the sewer, That's what's going to happen to them. So how will they ever be delivered? The only way is that there's a third person in the mix. Krishna's pledged to be, ambivalent. He doesn't force, nor does he, keep people from learning about him. But if people have no interest, he's not going to force himself on them. However, we are neither Krishna nor the person who doesn't have any desire nor any adhikar. We're a third person. So we can pray on behalf of the person who has neither desire nor adhikar to, get the mercy of the Lord. So now Krishna has a reason to open that chute, and the undeserved, undesired, mercy falls down on their head. So I think that's also a key thing.
That's a beautiful analysis. I'm going to put it in my blog before I forget it. Yeah, how there's Krishna has his opinion, they have their opinion, but our opinion can make the difference.
Right. I call it the transistor principle. Because I was trained as an electronic engineer.
The PNP.
Yeah. So there's a collector emitter current and the collector base current. So a small current in the collector base, the emitter base, creates a huge current in the collector and emitter. So or collector base. So it's our small desire creates or opens a chute for Krishna's larger current to flow in their lives, But I think that's why we have to find novel ways and means to get people to stick around long enough that they get a lethal dose of Krishna consciousness. And once they do, then from that point onward,
their attraction will grow,
right?
Because they spontaneously choose to do Krishna conscious.
For some people, they need a friend. For some people, they need knowledge. For some people, they need a way to use their skills. For some people, they like festivals. For some people, it's something else. Whatever it is, we have to kind of see what it will take to give that person enough glue to stick around until, it doesn't matter anymore.
That's a very nice answer. That really added a lot to our discussion. One thing I just learned, I took a course on sociology of religion in the spring semester, religion, because so I could ride the buses in Tallahassee for free, and I could park my car on the campus, and I could use a library. I decided to enroll in the course because you can, in Florida, if you're over 60, you can audit courses for free. So I learned a lot of interesting things, and they actually analyze what, cults or new religions do to get new members. And they would say that they look for people who are at a turning point in their life, right? And they give them some support. And then they cut off their previous links to the material world, in different ways, by discrediting them in different ways, And then so it looks like this is the only hope, which is actually true. In our case, yeah, all the groups do that. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So, and I was thinking, like, as you're saying that, like the last semester in Tallahassee, that we had like people who would come to like, 1 or 2 programs, then like 4 or 5 programs. We had some people who came to 7 programs and then just stopped coming. And the question is, why did they stop coming? I'd like to really interview every person who stopped coming and say, why did you stop coming? Did we offend you in some way? And just see what it was. But, maybe one of their friends was really into it, but then they got really into something else, or, who knows?
They suddenly get the understanding of what Krishna consciousness really is.
Uh-huh.
And
They
think,
have to give up a lot of other things.
"Whoa," but it's already too late, at some point later in their lives, once you actually glimpse the reality of what's really going on in this world, it's hard to dumb yourself down again. I mean, you can run from it, like a fish on a hook, but eventually it just gets you. Devamrita Swami used to call it the poison gas under the door principle. You have the door shut, but the poison gas comes in under the bottom, and it gets you. So that's the way the truth is, that you can run, you can hide, you can pretend it's not there. But I think a lot of people do that. I did that, that you kind of suddenly you glimpse it all, and you think, wait a minute, I'm not ready for that. There has to be another way. And then you go out and you realize, there ain't no other way, and then eventually, you're gonna rebound, but I think that's what happens to a lot of people. Of course, sometimes it is that, a friend of theirs or a significant other or something, drags them away. That does happen, and occasionally some devotee says some really knuckleheaded thing that's just exactly the thing that pushes the wrong button somewhere or another, and they think, oh, these guys are all idiots, and they go away for a while. But again, I think that there'll be some rebound later on.
Thank you for that encouragement analysis. I guess we should stop here because it's past our recommended time. Thank you for your attention and your comments and realizations. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki.